Everybody has secrets. Some are a little deeper and darker than others, but we all have them. My secret that I'm going to share with you today, not a big deal, especially when you compare it to a lot of friends who have come out about their orientation or are transitioning, those sorts of things. For me, my confession is I have now had 2 hair transplant procedures. Ooh. I know it doesn't sound like a big deal, but when it's something you've been carrying around and kind of keeping on the down low, it's kind of hard to come out and let people know. But as I was looking at my second procedure and the journey I've been on, I thought it might be a good time to come up with a video, put something up on YouTube for friends, families, others to look at what I've gone through, my experiences, and if in some way what I've learned, what I've found in this process is helpful to somebody else, then that's a great thing. Let me tell you a little bit about myself. I was raised in a family where beauty is paramount over everything else. It was almost to the point of certain family members being not so nice. My grandfather would often look at people and say, "Oh, what a shame that they look that way. If they would only," and then he would fill in the blank, lose some weight, change their hairstyle, what have you. So from a very young age, I was taught that physical beauty and appearance really matters as far as a person's self-worth. This has been generational. My mother had several facelifts, and one could argue they were unneeded. She was a beautiful woman. I had a full head of hair and always been considered to be attractive. And then in my late 20s, early 30s, I started to notice some hair loss. And for me, it was typical male pattern baldness, where I lost in the front. I didn't lose crown area for quite some time, but initially I had lost in the front. It really started to wear at me. My mother saw it, and she would say, "Isn't there something that can be done?" And she found out about Rogaine, minoxidil, suggested that I try that. And of course, at her insistence, or one could say nagging, get some Rogaine and tried it. What I didn't understand at the time, and subsequent research has told me, is that it does very little for hair loss in the front. It's more for the crown. So that particular experiment was not fruitful. Still, I had the hair loss, and it wasn't profound. It was not really encumbering anything, but it was difficult. It was difficult for me. You look at yourself every day in the mirror. You notice these things. You try to avoid seeing them, but it's the one little flaw that your eye is always drawn to. Also, as a professional consideration, much of my professional life has been in sales. And in sales, appearance is important. The likelihood of closing a sale for somebody who's stunningly attractive versus somebody who's nice looking, there's not that much difference. However, if you have a trait, a physical trait that is distracting, then that can make a difference. That can be a difficulty. And for me, I was constantly worried that my hair loss was distracting people. That people were looking at my shiny bald area instead of looking me in the eye and understanding that I was offering them a good deal on whatever it was that they were buying from me. So that was certainly a consideration for me. And I'm going to be honest, just like every person, I want to be attractive to others. So all of these factors were constantly playing on me. It wasn't an overnight thing. I didn't go, oh wow, well I've got to go out and do something about my hair. As the hair loss progressed and as time went by, I found myself more and more preoccupied with this problem. So I started looking at what my choices were. The first thing so many of us do is, well, how can I style my hair differently? What can I do? I think that leads to a lot of men with their comb overs, which we know that goes nowhere. I had worn my hair long, coming from a background in the entertainment business and such, and also kind of being a biker guy. I had long hair, and I decided, well, maybe if I cut my hair shorter, that would not make it so obvious that I had this big, whatever you want to call it up there. That was helpful, but far from really where I wanted to be. You know, you look around, Jeff Bezos, so many guys out there bicking their heads, shaved heads. Why not? So, shaved the head. Discovered something that I was a little bit concerned about, and that is that I looked like the character Heisenberg from Breaking Bad. And probably not where I wanted to be. So I grew the hair back. This caused me to start looking at what can I do outside of changing my hairstyle. Many men will get what's come to be known as a system, and that's can be as simple as a toupee or some sort of another procedure. There's one that's called X strands, where they take fine hairs and fuse them with your existing hair to enhance the overall thing. There's spray-on treatments that darken the scalp so that you don't notice as much. The more I looked into those, the less I liked those ideas. Again, I'm kind of more wanting the natural appearance. Well, okay, maybe I can grow some hair. Maybe I'll revisit the Rogaine experiment. There's finasteride, which has been proven in studies to help to regrow hair and to strengthen hair that you have. That's as close to a miracle treatment out there without some sort of surgical intervention. And then understanding that minoxidil works more as a strengthening agent and certain areas of the hair, that started to look a little bit more enticing. There's also what they call protein-rich plasma, where they remove some of your blood, spin out the plasma, and then inject that back into your scalp. And that is also proven to be an effective therapy. For me, the ship had sailed. It was time to do something a little bit more involved. I decided to seriously research and look into the idea of a hair replacement procedure. When one goes on the internet, when one starts doing their research, you can find there is so much information out there. It is mind-boggling. There are so many YouTube videos, there are so many sites, there is so much good information, and for every bit of good information, there's some really bad information. How do you sort it all out? What can be done? What are the best procedures? Who knows? My nature is to always research and sometimes over-research things. I made some conclusions and I found some answers that made sense for me. When it comes to modern hair replacement, it really comes down to one of two procedures that most people choose. One is called FUE, the other is called FUT. FUE is where they take small grafts out of your head with one of two different types of tools and then move it to the area that you need done. There's basically two ways that this is generally done. One is the more traditional hand approach, where the surgeon, using tools that he himself manipulates, takes out those grafts. And then there's the robotic. I'm a big tech guy. Wow, robots doing your hair, that would be really cool, because everything robotic's cool. Well, what I found, and granted some of this is anecdotal, but it's from talking to professionals, is that the robotic FUE is not good. The word on the street is that the manufacturers of this equipment are really pushing it to try to get a foothold into the industry, but that the results are not super good. So I early on dismissed that idea. Now in the FUT procedure, the surgeon comes in and makes an incision, actually two incisions, in the back of your scalp, in the area where you have a lot of donor hair. He then removes a strip of those donor hair follicles, carefully sets that aside for harvest, and then sutures back up the incision. This leaves a scar. As I was researching this, that scar was the thing that really played on my mind. Well, what if I end up losing the hair in this area, the donor hair area, and I have this big, horrible scar on the back of my head? What if people see it when I'm at the beach or swimming or what have you, my hair's wet? That would be horrible. That was a genuine concern for me, particularly when I weighed out all of the options, in that with FUT, you usually get more harvestable hair. It's usually less expensive. It's typically very successful. So there were a lot of pros, but that scar consideration was a biggie for me. Then I started looking at a lot of online photos. Unless you're dealing with a surgeon that's really bad, the scar is going to be very minimal. I didn't rule it out. Now, when one is going into this process and has made the decision hair restoration is likely going to be a thing, then is the time to really start shopping for a professional to help you. When I had made that choice, I decided to start shopping very seriously in my area. It was very easy for me to narrow it down to one of two surgeons. Of those two surgeons, I ultimately decided on Dr. Zufelt at the Hair Restoration Center of Utah. Why did I choose Dr. Zufelt? Well, there were several reasons. One of the real big ones is location. His clinic is located approximately 15 minutes away from my home. On the day of the procedure, travel was not a consideration in any way, shape, or form. I did speak to the staff of both of the surgeons, kind of got ballpark estimates on their procedures and their costs. At the end of the day, Dr. Zufelt was slightly, and I emphasize slightly, less money. It was not a huge financial consideration, but it did play part in the decision. One of the very large factors was when I met with, talked with, or read the experience of customers of both surgeons. Both doctors offer great services. However, Dr. Zufelt has concentrated a lot of his practice on working with the LGBTQ and transitioning community. I'm a big ally and a big advocate for this group of people. I also heard, and not directly from the other gentleman, but that he was uncomfortable working with people from that community. That for me is a huge factor and very much played into my decision. We decided that we would do a procedure, an FUT procedure, again, the harvest of a strip of hair, of 2,000 grafts. We would use PRP, protein-rich plasma, to expedite healing. Looking at my budget and my situation, I made what would later become a poor choice for me. I looked at men of my age and my situation and realized that so many of them do have hair loss here in the crown area. And I figured, well, it may actually even look more natural if I just let that area kind of be. For the most part, we ignored the crown area of my head where I had loss, but it was not super significant. I figured it was a good compromise. Again, hair procedures are not cheap, so it was a balancing act. Had I to do it over, I would have concentrated on the entire scalp. We decided to go forth, and June 8th came around, and we started at 7:30 in the morning. When I went in, met with the staff, Rachel and Trudy, wonderful folks, filled out all the paperwork, questionnaires, medical history, looked at the procedure. Trudy first went over it with me, and then Dr. Zufelt filled me in detail what to expect. He and I went back, and he got out his Sharpies and made some kind of art project on my head. I'm not going to talk about what it looked like, but he strategically decided what my hairline would look like. Incidentally, word on the street is when it comes to hairline, nobody's better than Dr. Z. You can look at mine, you can look at his work online, you can decide for yourself, but I really liked what he came up with. After he prepared me with that, we went back into the inner sanctum to the area where they actually do the transplant. When it comes to anesthesia, there are basically two schools of thought. Some surgeons prefer to use a general, some prefer to use a local. With a general, basically they put you out, you sleep through the procedure, you wake up, you're done. I don't like general anesthetic. Dr. Zufelt prefers using local. They numbed up my head, got all that done, and then you basically lie forward on the table. They have an electrical massage tool that one of the assistants uses to keep your circulation going while they're harvesting the hair. And I'm going to tell you, that felt amazing. That was the most pleasurable part of the whole procedure. Now, I need to remark, and again, it's been a little over a year, but I don't recall feeling any substantial pain whatsoever. A little bit of discomfort, but no real pain. He goes through a procedure that professionally is called making sites. He takes a scalpel and carefully makes holes at various angles where the grafts will be placed. This is arguably where the art of hair replacement takes place. Because human hair doesn't just grow straight up and down. It grows at angles. And Dr. Zufelt has developed an eye for the art of how the hair grows in. And he's able to make those sites just properly. The goal was to get 2,000 individual grafts to implant into my head. The good news is they actually harvested 2,846. That's 846 more than what the initial plan was going to be. And what is really cool about Dr. Zufelt, and from what I understand most surgeons, is that every follicle is very precious. And Dr. Zufelt will not waste your donor hair. I mean, you're in there because you have a limited amount of hair. So he implants every possible graft that he can, and he doesn't charge extra for any grafts that he overharvests. Upon making the sites, then he gets to take a break. He brings in his assistants. They actually place the grafts. That is by and large the vast majority of the time spent with them doing it, and they start in the front and work back. Then it comes time for post-op. They bandage up your head, and in my case, being of the Harley-Davidson persuasion, I had a do-rag which I put over the bandages. Again, vanity, didn't want to run around with a big turban on my head. Yes, Dr. Zufelt gave me some pain meds. I didn't even refill the prescription. Very little pain. I took Tylenol. It's important not to touch your implants, obviously. They've just been set in. They're weak for right now. When you're sleeping, you want to elevate your head. Otherwise, you can suffer from some swelling. Many do. I have very little swelling. They go through, particularly Jane. Jane is wonderful. Jane is Dr. Zufelt's nurse. But she goes through the whole process of how you go about washing your hair. It's involved, and I'm not going to go into detail here, but just her description is kind of worth the price of admission. Incidentally, they offer as a service the follow-up day. You can go in and she will wash your hair for you, which, why not? I did. They talk extensively about care of the scar. You use an antibiotic ointment on it. That's pretty much, they give you the handout sheet, easy stuff. There are some inherent side effects, as with any procedure. One of them that I think is important to know about is that, yes, in an FUT procedure, they have made an incision across the back of your head. Inevitably, they are going to cut some nerves. And that results in a numbness in the back of the head. And it's often described as helmet head, the feeling that you have a helmet on. For me, initially, it was pretty prevalent, but they say that goes away completely in 3 to 6 months. For me, it didn't last nearly that long. Now the healing begins, and it basically happens in several steps. What first starts to happen is you'll look at it in the first few days and it's like, wow, I've got new hair growing and this is really cool, which can be exciting, but it can also be disappointing because mostly that new hair growth will fall out. It's what they call shock loss. It's not a big deal. It's the follicle that's important, not the little hair shaft that's coming out of the follicle. Typically, a large percentage of those will fall out. The good news is they'll be replaced by new hair shafts out of the same follicle. So if you do go through this procedure and have some shock loss, don't be worried. It's not a big deal. The actual regrowth starts at about 3 months to 6 months, depending on your hair, your texture, that sort of thing. And you can ultimately look for the final outcome in approximately a year. Okay, so how did my first procedure go? Wonderful. I loved the outcome for the most part. And I've talked about this earlier. I sincerely wish that I had bit the bullet and gone for the whole area. This crown area has been a concern for me. Well, let me tell you anecdotally what happened. I had been feeling really super great about my procedure. As most people, I see myself mainly front on in the mirror. And front on, everything was great, no problems. Then one day I was in, of all places, Target with a friend, and I was waiting while she was changing and trying on some clothes in the dressing room. And immediately overhead they had a great mirrored ceiling. And I happened to glance up. And what I saw was this bald spot right there that looked like I should be wearing a yarmulke. And I'm not Jewish. I don't wear a yarmulke. But that played on my mind. And like so many others, my mind is the kind that just keeps playing over and over again. And I was constantly thinking about my bald spot. Dude, I'm the bald guy. That has been a mantra for me from the earliest step of this journey. I don't want to be the bald guy. And that really, it bugged me. Yes, what I had accomplished, what Dr. Zufelt had accomplished for me, was profound. I was seeing subtly the changes in how I was being treated. I felt and looked younger. So I was battling with this dichotomy of what to do now. I went in for my 13-month follow-up with Dr. Zufelt, and we looked at the situation and we talked about it. What we decided was we can look at a second procedure. There were a couple of different ways to go. We could just look at the crown area, or we could look at what the ultimate goal was. Think about it. Are we going to look at this from one more procedure or potentially two more procedures? Where do we go? We decided for another 2,000 graft procedure, FUT with PRP. We booked it. Second procedure, amazing. It actually was more comfortable and easier than the first for me. A lot of that is I already knew what to experience. The majority of the procedure I napped through. Super easy. Again, just like with the first, he harvested more hair than he had intended. This time, the actual graft count was 2,326. No extra charge, and wow. We accomplished everything that we had set out to do. My crown area is now filled with grafts. Also significantly, he was able to place extra grafts in the areas around the first, so that as these come in and regrow, I'm going to have thicker and fuller hair. Now, this procedure happened 2 weeks ago. I don't have the results to show you. I don't want to wait a year to do them to finish this video. So I hope to follow up with you when this entire process is done and let you know how it went. Now, the very interesting thing that I've noticed about hair replacement and the interesting payoff to the journey is once I grew back my own natural hair, nobody noticed. I didn't have anybody, seriously, people that I have known for years, didn't have anybody come up to me and say, wow, did you have some kind of hair procedure? Looks like you have more hair now. Didn't happen. Doesn't happen. People don't make that conscious connection. People notice the deficit. People don't notice when you replace it, when you repair it. So the biggest compliment that you can get when you've had some kind of a procedure is nobody seems to notice. I hope that you have found something of value in this video for you. My goal was to share my journey. I'm going to say, from my standpoint, I look at this as a total success. I've had minimal, if any, side effects. My overall self-esteem feels better. I feel younger. I feel more vibrant. I feel like I'm more attractive. And the reality is, if you feel more attractive, you are more attractive. Now, if you have found this video to be helpful to you, please just click the like button. It helps me. It builds stats. You can consider subscribing to my channel. I'm going to admit, my YouTube channel is schizophrenic. You might find a hair video, you might find a video of me playing a song, but what's it going to hurt you if you subscribe? Feel free to make comments below, and if you have questions, put them in there. I'll do my best to answer them for you. Again, I hope this has been helpful. Thank you for indulging me and letting me ramble on for a bit.